Sarah Mitchell pulled her worn winter coat tighter around her shoulders as she hurried down the dimly lit street. The November wind cut through downtown Chicago like a knife, and she could see her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Her shift at the diner had run late again, and now it was past midnight. All she wanted was to get home to her 6-year-old son Tommy, who was staying with Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor who helped with babysitting when Sarah worked the night shift. The single mother had been struggling to make ends meet ever since her husband Mark had walked out on them 2 years ago. He had left without explanation, just a note saying he couldn't handle the responsibility anymore. Sarah had found herself alone with a 4-year-old child, a mountain of debt, and no college degree to help her find better work. The diner job barely covered rent and groceries, but it was steady work, and her boss, Linda, was understanding about her situation. As she turned the corner onto Elm Street, Sarah noticed a figure hunched on the steps of the old Gothic church. St. Bartholomew's had been abandoned for years, its towering spires and stone gargoyles creating an imposing silhouette against the night sky. The building had a reputation in the neighborhood for being haunted, though Sarah had never believed in such stories. She was too practical for ghost tales, too focused on real-world problems like paying bills and keeping food on the table. The figure on the steps was shivering violently. As Sarah got closer, she could see it was a man, probably in his 30s, with dark hair and pale skin. He wore only a thin white shirt and black pants, completely inadequate for the bitter cold. His arms were wrapped around himself, and she could hear his teeth chattering from several feet away. Sarah's first instinct was to keep walking. Chicago could be dangerous at night, especially for a woman alone. He was always told her to mind her own business and not get involved with strangers. But something about the man's obvious distress tugged at her heart. She thought of Tommy and how she would want someone to help her child if he were ever in trouble. She stopped and called out softly, "Are you okay?" The man looked up, and Sarah was struck by his unusual appearance. His eyes seemed to glitter in the streetlight, an unusual shade of deep blue that appeared almost violet. His features were sharp and aristocratic, with high cheekbones and a straight nose. Despite his obvious discomfort from the cold, there was something elegant about him, as if he weren't used to such harsh conditions. "I'm quite cold," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that Sarah couldn't place. It sounded vaguely European, refined and cultured. "I seem to have found myself in an unfortunate situation." Sarah looked around the empty street. There were no other people, no cars, no signs of life except for the distant hum of traffic from the main road. The man clearly needed help, but she had so little to offer. Her own coat was secondhand, bought from a thrift store, and she needed it for the walk home. But as she looked at him shivering on those cold stone steps, maternal instinct took over. Without hesitation, she slipped off her jacket and held it out to him. "Here, take this. You'll freeze to death out here." The man stared at her in surprise, as if her gesture was completely unexpected. "I couldn't possibly take your coat. You need it yourself." "I'm almost home," Sarah lied, knowing she still had 8 blocks to walk. "Besides, you look like you need it more than I do." He accepted the jacket with graceful hands, and Sarah noticed his fingers were ice cold when they briefly touched hers. As he wrapped the coat around his shoulders, she saw relief flood across his face. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. "You have no idea how much this means to me. I'm Adrian, by the way. Adrian Blackthorne." "Sarah Mitchell," she replied, already starting to shiver without her coat. "Are you new to the city? Do you have somewhere to stay?" Adrian's expression became guarded. "I'm between accommodations at the moment. I was supposed to meet someone here, but they appear to have been delayed." Sarah frowned. It seemed odd that someone would arrange to meet at an abandoned church in the middle of the night, but she didn't want to pry. Everyone had their reasons for doing things, and she had learned not to judge too quickly. "There's a homeless shelter about 6 blocks from here," she offered. "St. Mary's. They might have a bed available." "You're very kind, but I think I'll wait here a bit longer." My associate should arrive soon. Sarah hesitated. Every maternal instinct told her not to leave him alone in the cold, but she also knew she needed to get home to Tommy. Mrs. Chen was getting older and couldn't stay up all night watching him. Will you be all right? I feel terrible leaving you here. Adrian smiled, and Sarah noticed his teeth were unusually white and straight. I'll be fine, thanks to your generosity. I won't forget this kindness. As Sarah began to walk away, she turned back once to see Adrian still sitting on the church steps, her jacket wrapped around him. Something about the scene struck her as oddly poetic, almost like a painting. The Gothic architecture, the mysterious stranger, the way the streetlight cast long shadows across the stone steps. The walk home without her coat was brutal. By the time Sarah reached her small apartment building, she was shaking uncontrollably from the cold. Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely get her key in the lock. Mrs. Chen opened her door as soon as she heard Sarah in the hallway. Goodness, child, where's your coat? You look half frozen. Mrs. Chen was a tiny woman in her 70s who had immigrated from Taiwan 40 years ago. She had raised 5 children of her own and had a natural instinct for taking care of people. Sarah had been incredibly fortunate to find her as a neighbor when she moved into the building. I gave it to someone who needed it more, Sarah said, still shivering. Mrs. Chen clucked disapprovingly and ushered Sarah into her warm apartment. You can't give away your coat in this weather. You have a child to think about. He was sitting outside in just a shirt. Mrs. Case. Chen. He would have frozen to death. The elderly woman shook her head but brought Sarah a cup of hot tea and an extra blanket. Tommy was sound asleep on the couch, his small face peaceful in the lamplight. Sarah's heart swelled with love as she looked at her son. Everything she did, every sacrifice she made, was for him. Was Tommy any trouble? Sarah asked, settling into a chair with her tea. He's never any trouble. Such a good boy. He did his homework and ate all his dinner. But Sarah, you need to be more careful. This isn't a safe neighborhood for a woman alone at night, especially without proper clothes. Sarah knew Mrs. Chen was right, but she couldn't regret helping Adrian. There had been something about him that touched her heart, something vulnerable despite his refined appearance. She wondered if he had found somewhere warm to stay, if his associate had eventually shown up. I know you think I'm too trusting, Sarah said, sipping her tea, but my grandmother always said that kindness comes back to you when you least expect it. Mrs. Chen softened. Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise woman. But kindness and foolishness sometimes look very similar, especially in a big city. Sarah carried sleeping Tommy back to their apartment and tucked him into his bed. Their place was small, just 1 bedroom and a living area with a tiny kitchen, but it was clean and warm. She had decorated it with second-hand furniture and artwork that Tommy had made in school. It wasn't much, but it was home. As she got ready for bed, Sarah found herself thinking about Adrian Blackthorne. The name sounded vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place where she might have heard it. There had been something almost otherworldly about him, from his unusual eyes to his formal way of speaking. She wondered what his story was. What had brought him to sit alone on the steps of an abandoned church in the middle of a cold November night? The next morning, Sarah woke to find frost covering the windows of their apartment. The temperature had dropped even further overnight, and she shivered as she made breakfast for Tommy. She would need to buy another coat, though she wasn't sure how she would afford it. The thrift stores might have something suitable, and she still had a few days before her next shift. Tommy was unusually chatty over his bowl of cereal, telling her about a dream he'd had about flying over the city like a superhero. Sarah loved these morning conversations with her son. Despite all their struggles, Tommy remained optimistic and imaginative, qualities she was determined to nurture. "Mommy, why don't we have a car like other families?" Tommy asked, swirling his spoon through his cereal. "Cars cost a lot of money, sweetheart, but we do fine with the bus and walking, don't we?" "I guess. But it would be nice when it's cold like this." Sarah's heart ached. She wanted to give Tommy so much more than she could afford. A car, a house with a yard, vacations, the latest toys, all the things other kids seem to have without question. "Maybe someday," she said, ruffling his hair. "For now, we have each other, and that's pretty special." After dropping Tommy off at school, Sarah headed to the thrift store to look for a replacement coat. The selection was limited, but she found a navy blue wool coat that was only slightly too large. It would have to do. As she paid for it, she calculated in her head how the expense would affect their grocery budget for the week. On her way home, Sarah decided to walk past St. Bartholomew's Church, curious to see if Adrian was still there or if he had found help. The church steps were empty now, with only a few autumn leaves scattered across the stone. She felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that he wasn't still sitting there in the cold. Disappointment that she would never know what became of him. But as she turned to leave, something caught her eye. There, folded neatly on the top step, was her jacket. Sarah climbed the steps and picked it up, surprised to find it was completely dry and seemed to smell faintly of expensive cologne. Attached to one of the buttons was a small note, written on heavy paper in elegant handwriting. "Dear Sarah," the note read, "thank you for your incredible kindness. Your generosity will not be forgotten. I hope we meet again under better circumstances. With deepest gratitude, Adrian Blackthorne." Sarah looked around, but there was no sign of Adrian anywhere. She slipped her old jacket on over the new one, grateful to have it back, but puzzled by how it had appeared here. The cologne scent was subtle but expensive, definitely not something someone without a home would typically have. Walking home, Sarah found herself scanning faces in the crowd, half hoping to catch another glimpse of the mysterious man she had helped. But Adrian Blackthorne seemed to have vanished as suddenly as he had appeared. That evening, as Sarah prepared for another shift at the diner, she told Mrs. Chen about finding her jacket returned to the church steps. "Very strange, Mrs. Teddy," Chen said, adjusting Tommy's homework at her kitchen table. "Most homeless people would have kept a good coat, especially in this weather." Maybe he wasn't homeless, Sarah mused. He spoke like he was educated, and his clothes were nice quality, just not warm enough. Or maybe, Mrs. Chen said with a knowing look, you helped someone more important than you realized. Sarah laughed. "I doubt that, but it doesn't matter anyway. I'm just glad he's somewhere warm." As Sarah walked to work that night, she felt oddly confident despite the cold. Having her jacket back made the journey more comfortable, but there was something else too, a feeling that her act of kindness had set something in motion, though she couldn't say what. The diner was busy that night with the usual mix of late-shift workers, insomniacs, and people with nowhere else to go. Sarah moved efficiently between tables, taking orders and refilling coffee cups, her mind occasionally drifting to thoughts of Adrian and his strange, elegant presence. Around 2 a.m, when the crowd had thinned to just a few regular customers, a man in an expensive suit entered the diner. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair and intelligent dark eyes. With Trust Teddy, Sarah had never seen him before, but something about his demeanor suggested he was someone accustomed to being in charge. He chose a corner booth and ordered only coffee, then sat reading what appeared to be business documents. Sarah noticed he seemed to be watching her as she worked, though not in a threatening way, more like someone trying to solve a puzzle. When she brought him a second cup of coffee, he looked up at her with a slight smile. "You're Sarah Mitchell, aren't you?" Sarah was immediately on guard. "Do I know you?" "No, but I know of you. My name is Marcus Donnelly. I believe you helped a friend of mine recently." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Adrian?" Marcus nodded. "Adrian Blackthorne, yes. He told me about your kindness to him when he was in a difficult situation. He was quite moved by your generosity." "Is he all right?" "I was worried about him being out in the cold. He's perfectly fine now, thanks in large part to you. In fact, that's why I'm here." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "Mr. Blackthorne would like to offer you a position with his company, if you're interested." Sarah stared at the card, which was printed on heavy stock with elegant lettering. Blackthorn Enterprises, it read, with an address in one of Chicago's most expensive downtown districts. I don't understand. What kind of position? I don't have any special skills, Mr. Daddy. Blackthorn is looking for someone to manage the household staff at his private residence. It would include room and board for you and your son, as well as a substantial salary. He believes someone with your compassionate nature would be perfect for the role. Sarah felt dizzy. Room and board meant she and Tommy could leave their cramped apartment. A substantial salary meant financial security for the first time in years. But it also seemed too good to be true. Why would he offer me a job based on one meeting? He doesn't know anything about me, Marcus smiled. Mr. Blackthorn is an excellent judge of character. He saw enough in you that night to know you're exactly the kind of person he needs. Of course, you'd be free to refuse if you're not interested. Sarah looked around the diner at her current life. The grease-stained uniforms, the demanding customers, the constant worry about money. Then she thought about Tommy, about giving him opportunities she could never afford otherwise. I'd need to think about it, and meet with Mr. Blackthorn myself, of course. Naturally, he's expecting that. Would tomorrow evening be convenient? He could send a car to pick you up. The offer felt surreal, like something from a fairy tale. Sarah knew she should be suspicious, but something about Marcus seemed genuine. And Adrian had returned her jacket, which suggested he was trustworthy. All right, she said finally. Tomorrow evening, Marcus left a generous tip and departed with the promise that someone would contact her with details. Sarah spent the rest of her shift in a daze, wondering if she had just made the best decision of her life or a terrible mistake. The black sedan that arrived to pick up Sarah the following evening was unlike anything she had ever seen. The leather interior was cream-colored and spotless, and the driver, a polite man named James, treated her with the kind of respect usually reserved for celebrities or politicians. As they drove through Chicago's downtown district, Sarah watched the buildings grow taller and more impressive. Tommy was staying with Mrs. Chen again, who had been both excited and worried about Sarah's mysterious job opportunity. The elderly woman had made Sarah promise to call if anything seemed suspicious and had insisted on writing down the license plate number of the car. Very fancy, Mrs. Chen had observed as they watched the sedan pull up. Either this man is very wealthy or very dangerous. Maybe both. Now, as they turned onto a tree-lined street in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, Sarah realized that Adrian Blackthorn was definitely very wealthy. The houses here were more like mansions, each sitting on carefully landscaped grounds behind wrought iron gates. The sedan stopped in front of a particularly impressive estate. The house was built in a Gothic revival style that reminded Sarah of an English castle, complete with towers, arched windows, and elaborate stonework. Mature oak trees lined the circular driveway, and Sarah could see gardens extending beyond the house into the darkness. James opened her door and escorted her to the front entrance, which was flanked by stone lions. The heavy wooden door opened before they even reached it, revealing a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. Ms. Mitchell, welcome. I'm Elena Vasquez, the house manager. Mr. Blackthorn is waiting for you in the library. Elena led Sarah through a grand foyer with marble floors and a crystal chandelier that must have cost more than Sarah made in a year. The house was beautifully furnished with antiques and artwork that looked like they belonged in a museum. Despite its opulence, there was something oddly timeless about the decor, as if it hadn't changed in decades. The library was a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, comfortable leather chairs, and a fireplace where logs crackled warmly. Adrian stood near the fireplace, and Sarah was surprised by how different he looked in his own environment. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit and moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to luxury. "Sarah," he said, approaching her with a warm smile, "thank you for coming. I hope the drive wasn't too uncomfortable." It was wonderful, actually. I've never been in a car that nice. Please, sit down. Can Elena bring you something to drink? Coffee? Tea? Perhaps some wine? Sarah chose tea, and Elena disappeared quietly to fetch it. Sarah settled into one of the leather chairs, trying not to seem overwhelmed by her surroundings. She felt terribly underdressed in her best work clothes, next to Adrian's obvious sophistication. I have to admit, this is all a bit overwhelming, Sarah said. Your home is beautiful. Thank you. It's been in my family for several generations. Adrian took the chair across from her, his unusual eyes reflecting the firelight. I wanted to speak with you personally about the position Marcus mentioned, but first, I want to thank you again for your kindness the other night. You have no idea what your gesture meant to me. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Adrian said seriously. They wouldn't have. In my experience, most people are far too concerned with their own comfort to help a stranger in need. Your willingness to sacrifice your own warmth for someone you didn't know says a great deal about your character. Elena returned with tea service on a silver tray, the china delicate and obviously expensive. Sarah accepted a cup gratefully, the warm liquid helping to calm her nerves. Marcus mentioned you're looking for someone to manage household staff, Sarah said. But I have to be honest, I don't have experience with that kind of work. I've been a waitress and a clerk, nothing fancy. Experience can be learned, Adrian replied. What interests me is your natural empathy and your obvious integrity. Those qualities can't be taught. What exactly would the job involve? The estate employs about a dozen staff members. Housekeepers, gardeners, security personnel, kitchen staff. They're all excellent at their jobs, but they need someone to coordinate their efforts, handle scheduling, and serve as a liaison between them and myself. Elena has been wonderful in that role, but she's expressed interest in reducing her responsibilities. Elena smiled from where she stood near the door. I'm not as young as I once was. I'd like to focus more on the administrative side of things and less on the day-to-day management. The position would come with a substantial salary, Adrian continued, as well as a full apartment in the staff wing for you and your son. There's also an excellent school district nearby, much better than most public schools in the city. Sarah's heart raced. The opportunity sounded like a dream come true, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was too good to be true. Why me? She asked directly. You could hire someone with actual experience, someone with references and training. Adrian was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his words carefully. Have you ever had an instinct about someone, Sarah? A feeling that they were meant to be part of your life in some way? I suppose. That's how I felt when you gave me your jacket. Not just grateful, but certain that you were someone special, someone I needed to know better. There was something intense in Adrian's gaze that made Sarah slightly uncomfortable, though she couldn't say why. She looked around the library, noticing that many of the books appeared to be quite old, with leather bindings and titles in languages she didn't recognize. What kind of business is Blackthorn Enterprises? She asked. Investment management, primarily. I help wealthy families preserve and grow their assets across generations. Much of my work involves international clients, which requires me to travel frequently. So you'd be away often? Sometimes. That's another reason I need someone reliable to manage things here. Someone I can trust completely. Sarah sipped her tea, trying to process everything. The salary Adrian had mentioned was more than 3 times what she made at the diner. The apartment would save her hundreds of dollars a month in rent. Tommy could attend a better school, have opportunities she never could have provided otherwise. Could I see the staff quarters? And meet some of the other employees? Of course. Elena, would you give Sarah a tour? The staff wing was located in a separate section of the house, connected by a covered walkway. Sarah's potential apartment was spacious and beautifully furnished, with 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, and a living area with large windows overlooking the gardens. It was nicer than any place she had ever lived. Elena introduced her to several staff members, including Miguel, the head groundskeeper, and Catherine, the senior housekeeper. Everyone seemed friendly and professional, and they all spoke well of Adrian as an employer. "He's very fair," Catherine told her as they walked through the main house. "Pays well, respects our time off, never unreasonable with his requests. Some of us have worked here for 20 years or more. The only thing that's a bit unusual," Miguel added, "is that he keeps odd hours, often sleeps during the day, and is active at night. But that works fine for those of us who prefer day shifts." Sarah filed that information away. Perhaps Adrian suffered from insomnia, or maybe his international business required him to work with different time zones. When they returned to the library, Adrian was reading a book that looked ancient. He closed it carefully as they entered, and Sarah noticed the cover was written in what appeared to be Latin. "What did you think?" he asked. "It's all wonderful. Almost too wonderful. But you have concerns." Sarah nodded. "It seems like an incredible opportunity, but I need to think about Tommy. This would be a big change for him, leaving the only home he's known." "Of course. Take all the time you need to decide. In the meantime, perhaps you'd like to bring Tommy to see the place? There are extensive grounds for children to explore, and I think he might enjoy it." The idea of Tommy having space to run and play instead of being cooped up in their tiny apartment was appealing. "That would be nice, thank you." "Excellent. Shall we say this weekend? James can pick you both up Saturday afternoon." As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself reluctantly preparing to leave. The house was so comfortable, so peaceful, that returning to her small apartment and the realities of her daily struggles felt jarring. Adrian walked her to the door personally. "I hope you'll consider the position seriously, Sarah. I have a feeling you'd be very happy here. I'll definitely think about it." "Good. And Sarah?" He paused, his hand on the door handle. "Trust your instincts. They served you well the night you helped me." During the drive home, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. The job offer would solve all her immediate problems and provide opportunities for Tommy that she had never dared hope for. But something nagged at her, a feeling she couldn't quite identify. Mrs. Chen was waiting up when Sarah returned, eager to hear every detail. Sarah described the house, the job responsibilities, and the generous compensation, but found herself hesitating to share her vague sense of unease. "It sounds like a miracle," Mrs. Chen said after hearing the story. "But miracles sometimes come with hidden costs." "What do you mean?" "Nothing specific, just that when something seems too good to be true, it's wise to ask what the catch might be." Sarah spent a restless night thinking about Adrian's offer. When she finally fell asleep, she had strange dreams about Gothic houses and mysterious strangers with unusual eyes. Saturday arrived, gray and drizzly, typical November weather for Chicago. Tommy was excited about visiting the big house, chattering nonstop during the car ride about what he hoped to see. "Do you think there might be secret passages, Mom?" "Old houses always have secret passages in movies." "I don't know, sweetheart. We'll have to see." The estate looked even more impressive in daylight. The gardens were beautifully maintained despite the season, with sculptured hedges and stone pathways that invited exploration. Tommy's eyes grew wide as they approached the front door. Adrian greeted them warmly, dressed casually in dark jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. He seemed genuinely pleased to meet Tommy, kneeling down to the boy's level and shaking his hand seriously. "So you're the young man I've heard so much about. Your mother tells me you're quite smart." Tommy beamed under the attention. "I'm good at math and reading, and I know lots of dinosaur facts." "Dinosaur facts are very important. Perhaps you'd like to see the library? I have some books about paleontology that might interest you." As they toured the house, Sarah watched Tommy's reaction carefully. The boy was clearly impressed by the mansion's grandeur, but he seemed comfortable around Adrian, who had a natural way with children. The apartment in the staff wing delighted Tommy. "Mom, look! I'd have my own room, and look at this kitchen." He ran from window to window, examining the view of the gardens. After lunch, Adrian suggested they explore the grounds. The estate was larger than Sarah had realized, with formal gardens, a greenhouse, and even a small pond. Tommy was fascinated by everything, especially the old carriage house that had been converted into a garage for Adrian's collection of vintage cars. "This is like a castle," Tommy whispered to Sarah as they walked along a stone path lined with rose bushes. "It's very beautiful," Sarah agreed. Adrian, walking beside them, overheard. "My ancestors built this place to last for generations. I like to think of it as a sanctuary, a place where people can feel safe and cared for." As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself relaxing despite her earlier reservations. Adrian was an attentive host, and it was clear he had made an effort to make sure Tommy felt welcome. Several times she caught him watching her son with what appeared to be genuine fondness. During tea in the garden room, Tommy asked Adrian about his work. "I help people take care of their money," Adrian explained simply, "making sure they have enough for the things they need. Like my mom does at the diner? Similar, but I work with very wealthy people who have more money than they could spend in a lifetime. My job is to make sure their money continues to grow so their children and grandchildren will be taken care of too." "That sounds important." "It is. Almost as important as what your mother does." Tommy looked curious. "What does my mom do that's important?" "She takes care of people. She works very hard to make sure you have everything you need, and she's kind to strangers who need help. Those are very valuable qualities." Sarah felt her cheeks warm at the praise. She wasn't used to people recognizing her efforts, let alone valuing them so highly. As the visit drew to a close, Adrian asked if he could speak with Sarah privately while Tommy explored the library with Elena. "What do you think?" he asked when they were alone in his study. "Tommy loves it here. He's already talking about which room would be his and asking about the school." "And what about you?" Sarah hesitated. "It seems perfect, maybe too perfect. What concerns you? I keep wondering why someone like you would want to help someone like me. We're from completely different worlds." Adrian moved to the window, looking out at the gardens where twilight was beginning to fall. "Perhaps that's exactly why. In my world, Sarah, genuine kindness is rare. People are usually kind because they want something, because it benefits them in some way. What you did for me that night was different. It was pure generosity, with no thought of reward. But that doesn't explain why you'd offer me such an incredible opportunity, doesn't it?" Adrian turned back to her, his blue eyes serious. "I've lived a very long time, Sarah, and I've learned to recognize when someone is truly special. You have qualities that can't be bought or taught. I'd consider myself fortunate to have you as part of my household." The way he said "lived a very long time" struck Sarah as odd, given that he couldn't be more than mid-30s. But before she could think too much about it, Tommy burst through the door, excitement radiating from every inch of his small frame. "Mom, Elena showed me a secret passage. It goes from the library to the kitchen, and she said it was built so the servants could move around without being seen by guests." Sarah laughed. "So you found your secret passage after all. Can we live here, Mom? Please? It's the most amazing place ever." Looking at her son's hopeful face and thinking about everything Adrian was offering, Sarah made her decision. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Yes, we can live here." Adrian smiled, and for a moment Sarah could have sworn his canine teeth looked unusually sharp in the lamplight. But when she looked again, they appeared perfectly normal. "Wonderful," he said. "Welcome to the family, Sarah." Moving into the Blackthorn estate felt like stepping into a fairy tale. Within a week, Sarah had given notice at the diner, packed their few belongings, and said goodbye to Mrs. Chen, who had insisted on staying in touch and made Sarah promise to visit regularly. "Something feels different about this place," Mrs. Melinda perceived. Chen had said during their final conversation, "I can't put my finger on it, but be careful, Sarah. Some gifts come with strings attached. Tommy adapted to their new life with the resilience of childhood. He enrolled in the local private school where the teachers were impressed by his intelligence and eagerness to learn. The grounds of the estate became his personal playground, and he spent hours exploring every corner, befriending the gardening staff and learning about the various plants and flowers. Sarah's duties as household manager proved more complex than she had initially anticipated, but also more rewarding, coordinating the schedules of 12 staff members, managing the household budget, and overseeing the maintenance of such a large property required organizational skills she hadn't known she possessed. Elena proved to be an excellent mentor, gradually transferring responsibilities while remaining available for guidance. The strange thing was how naturally everything seemed to fall into place. The other staff members accepted her authority without question, despite her lack of experience. The complex systems that ran the estate made perfect sense to her, as if she had been born to manage such a household. Adrian was an ideal employer in many ways. He was respectful, generous with bonuses and time off, and never made unreasonable demands. But Sarah began to notice peculiarities about his behavior that she found increasingly difficult to explain. He was never seen during daylight hours. His bedroom, which occupied an entire floor of the main tower, had blackout curtains so thick that no light could penetrate. When Sarah asked about this, Elena explained that Adrian suffered from a rare medical condition that made him extremely sensitive to sunlight. "It's called xeroderma pigmentosum," Elena said matter-of-factly. "Very serious. Even brief exposure to UV light can be dangerous for him." Sarah accepted this explanation, though she found it odd that someone with such a condition would choose to live in Chicago with its abundant sunny days. There were other strange things. Adrian never seemed to eat regular meals, though the kitchen staff prepared elaborate dinners that were sent to his private quarters each evening. Sarah never saw evidence that the food was consumed, and the dishes often came back to the kitchen seemingly untouched. He also had an extraordinary number of visitors, all of whom came exclusively at night. Elegant men and women in expensive clothes would arrive in luxury cars, staying for meetings that sometimes lasted until dawn. Sarah was instructed never to disturb these gatherings, and the staff wing was off limits to visitors entirely. "Mr. Blackthorne takes his privacy very seriously," Elena explained when Sarah asked about the midnight meetings. "His clients prefer to conduct business away from prying eyes. Many of them are very prominent people who value discretion." The explanation made sense, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to these nocturnal gatherings than simple business meetings. Sometimes she could hear what sounded like multiple voices speaking in unison, almost like a chant, though she could never make out the words. Despite these oddities, Sarah found herself happier than she had been in years. The financial security allowed her to focus on things other than mere survival. She enrolled in online college courses, something she had always dreamed of doing but never had the time or money to pursue. Tommy was thriving in his new school, making friends and discovering talents in music and art that had never had room to develop in their previous circumstances. Adrian showed a particular interest in Tommy's development, often asking about his schoolwork and achievements. He had arranged for the boy to have tutoring in languages and music, opportunities that would have been impossible in their old life. "Your son is exceptionally bright," Adrian told Sarah one evening as they reviewed household accounts in his study. "Have you considered advanced placement programs? He's only 6 years old. Intellectual gifts shouldn't be constrained by age. I could arrange for him to be tested, perhaps provide additional educational opportunities." Sarah appreciated Adrian's interest in Tommy's future, but something about his intensity when discussing her son made her uncomfortable. It was as if Adrian saw potential in the boy that went beyond normal academic achievement. The first truly unsettling incident occurred about 6 weeks after they had moved to the estate. Sarah was working late in her office, finishing monthly schedules, when she heard Tommy crying from their apartment. She rushed to his room, finding him sitting up in bed, tears streaming down his face. "Mommy, there was a man in my room," he said, clinging to her. "What man, sweetheart?" "He was standing by my window." He had pale skin and dark clothes, and his eyes were really bright. He was looking at me, but when I sat up, he disappeared. Sarah's heart raced. She checked the windows, but they were all securely locked and showed no signs of being tampered with. They were on the second floor of the staff wing, making entry from outside virtually impossible without a ladder. It was probably just a nightmare, honey. Sometimes dreams can seem very real, but Tommy insisted he had been awake, and his description of the man was remarkably detailed for a child's imagination. Sarah made a mental note to speak with the security staff about increasing patrols around the staff quarters. When she mentioned the incident to Elena the next day, the older woman's reaction was oddly evasive. "Children have vivid imaginations," Elena said, but she wouldn't meet Sarah's eyes. "Perhaps we should consider moving your apartment to a different section of the building." "Why would that be necessary?" "Sometimes the older parts of large houses can be unsettling to children. Strange sounds, shadows that play tricks on the mind." But they had been living in their current apartment for over a month without any problems. Sarah couldn't understand why Tommy would suddenly start having such specific nightmares. The second incident was even more disturbing. Sarah woke one night to find their apartment door standing wide open. She was certain she had locked it before going to bed, as she always did. Checking on Tommy, she found him sleeping peacefully, but something felt wrong about the scene. The boy's window was also open, despite the fact that it was a cold December night. When she touched his forehead, his skin felt unusually cold, and there were what appeared to be small bruises on his neck, though they faded as she watched. Sarah's maternal instincts went into high alert. Something was happening to her son, and she was determined to find out what. She began staying awake at night, listening for sounds, watching for anything unusual. On the third night of her vigil, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside their apartment. Peering through the peephole, she saw a tall figure in dark clothing moving silently toward Tommy's room. The figure's face was pale and sharp-featured, with eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. Sarah grabbed a baseball bat she had kept by the door and quietly opened it. But the hallway was empty. There was no sign of the intruder, and no indication of how they might have vanished so quickly. The next morning, she decided to confront Adrian directly. She found him in his study just as the sun was setting, looking over what appeared to be genealogical charts spread across his desk. "We need to talk," Sarah said, not bothering with pleasantries. Adrian looked up, his expression immediately alert. "Of course. What's troubling you?" "Someone has been in our apartment at night. Someone has been watching Tommy. I want to know who, and I want to know why." Adrian's face remained carefully neutral. "That's a very serious accusation. Have you seen this intruder clearly?" "Clearly enough. A tall man with pale skin and unusual eyes. He disappears before I can confront him." "Sarah, you've been under a great deal of stress lately. Managing a household of this size, adjusting to a new life. Sometimes stress can manifest in—" "Don't you dare suggest I'm imagining this," Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp with anger. "Something is happening to my son, and I want answers." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with those unsettling blue eyes. Finally, he sighed and closed the genealogical charts. "You're right. There are things about this household that I haven't explained to you. Things that would be difficult for most people to understand or accept. Try me." Adrian moved to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. "My family, the Blackthorns, are not exactly what you would call ordinary people. We have existed for many centuries, accumulating wealth and knowledge, but also attracting attention from those who would seek to use our resources for their own purposes." "What kind of attention?" "There are others like us, Sarah. People with unusual capabilities and needs. Some of them have taken an interest in Tommy." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What kind of interest? Why Tommy?" "Your son is special in ways you don't yet understand. He has potential that extends beyond normal human capabilities. Certain individuals see that potential as something to be cultivated or controlled." "You're talking nonsense. Tommy is a normal 6-year-old boy." "Is he?" Adrian turned back to her, his eyes intense. Have you never noticed anything unusual about him? Perhaps an unusual empathy with others, or an ability to sense things that adults miss. Sarah thought about Tommy's uncanny ability to read people's emotions, his tendency to know when she was upset even when she tried to hide it. Even if that's true, it doesn't explain who's been in our apartment. Members of my household, watching over Tommy to ensure his safety. There are others who would harm him to get to me. Your household? You mean vampires? The word slipped out before Sarah could stop it, surprising them both. Adrian's expression shifted, becoming something between relief and resignation. So you do understand. On some level, Sarah felt the world tilt around her. That's impossible. Vampires don't exist. We exist, Sarah. We've always existed. Most of us try to live quietly, maintaining the balance between our nature and human society. But there are some who see mortals only as prey or tools to be used. This is insane. I'm taking Tommy and leaving tonight. That would be the worst possible thing you could do, Adrian said urgently. Tommy is safe here, under my protection. Out there, alone, you'd both be vulnerable. Vulnerable to what? To those who see Tommy's potential and want to claim it for themselves. Your son isn't just unusually perceptive, Sarah. He has the genetic markers that suggest he could become one of us. Sarah's knees nearly gave out. She gripped the back of a chair for support. You're saying Tommy could become a vampire? With the right circumstances, yes. That's why certain factions are interested in him. Some want to turn him while he's young and malleable. Others want to eliminate him before he can become a threat. And what do you want? Adrian's expression softened. I want to protect him, to let him grow up safely and choose his own path when he's old enough to understand what that choice means. Sarah's mind reeled. Everything she thought she knew about reality was crumbling around her, but even through her shock, her maternal instincts remained sharp. If you're really trying to protect him, why haven't you told me this before? Because I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. I thought we could provide that protection without you ever needing to know the truth about what we are. We? How many of you are there? Most of the staff you've met are human, but Elena, Marcus, and several others are part of my vampire household. We've been together for decades, some of us for centuries. Sarah thought about Elena's ageless appearance, Marcus's formal manner, the strange nocturnal schedule of the estate. Pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The night we met, she said slowly, when you were sitting on those church steps, were you in some kind of danger? I had been poisoned with a substance that temporarily weakened my supernatural abilities. I was essentially human for several hours, vulnerable to the cold in a way I hadn't experienced for centuries. Without your coat, I might not have survived until help arrived. So everything that's happened since then, the job offer, moving us here, it's all been about Tommy? Not entirely, Adrian said, and there was something raw in his voice. Your kindness that night touched something in me that I thought had died long ago. I wanted to help you not just because of Tommy, but because you deserved a better life. Sarah looked around the study, at the luxury that surrounded her, at the life she had thought was too good to be true, because it was too good to be true, at least for ordinary people. What happens now, she asked. That depends on you. You can leave, if you choose, though I hope you'll let me arrange protection for both of you. Or you can stay, knowing the truth, and let Tommy grow up in safety until he's old enough to make his own decisions about his future. And if I stay, what does that make me? A prisoner? A member of the family? Adrian said simply. Someone I care about more than I expected to when this began. The sincerity in his voice caught Sarah off guard. Despite the impossible circumstances, despite learning that her employer was a supernatural creature, she found herself believing him. Tommy can never become a vampire while he's still a child? Never. The transformation is extremely dangerous for anyone under 18. And even then, it requires the person's full consent and understanding. And you'd really let him choose? I'd insist upon it. A choice made under coercion or in ignorance isn't really a choice at all. Sarah was quiet for a long time, processing everything Adrian had told her. Finally, she looked up at him. I need to talk to Tommy. He needs to understand why strange things have been happening. Are you certain? Once he knows the truth, there's no going back to innocence. He's already lost his innocence about safety in the world. Better he should understand why. They found Tommy in the library, reading a book about ancient Egypt. When Sarah sat down beside him, he looked up with the bright, trusting eyes that had been her anchor through every difficult day of the past 2 years. Sweetheart, Adrian and I need to explain some things to you about our new home. Tommy listened with remarkable composure as Adrian carefully explained the truth about vampires, about the household, and about the special qualities that made Tommy himself unusual. When the explanation was finished, Tommy was quiet for several minutes, thinking it over with the serious consideration of a much older child. So vampires are real, but they're not like in the scary movies? Most of us aren't, Adrian confirmed. We try to live peacefully alongside humans. And some people think I might become one someday? It's possible, but only if you choose it when you're grown up. Tommy nodded thoughtfully. And you've been keeping us safe from the bad vampires who might want to hurt us? That's right. Tommy looked between his mother and Adrian, his expression unusually mature. I like living here. I like my school and my room and the gardens. And I like you, Adrian. If staying here means we're all safe, then I want to stay. Sarah felt tears threaten. Her son's acceptance of this impossible situation was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Are you sure, sweetheart? This is a big decision. I'm sure, Mom. Besides, Tommy grinned, showing the gap where his front tooth had recently fallen out. Having a vampire for a friend is pretty cool. Adrian laughed, the sound rich and warm. In that case, young man, perhaps it's time I taught you some of the family history. There are quite a few interesting stories. As Sarah watched her son chat excitedly with Adrian about vampire history and the secret room hidden behind the library's fireplace, she realized that her act of kindness on a cold November night had led her to the most unlikely family she could have imagined. Months later, as spring returned to Chicago, Sarah stood in the garden watching Tommy play with a group of children from his school. He was happy, healthy, and protected in ways she could never have provided alone. Adrian had kept his promise about letting Tommy choose his own future, but for now, the boy was content to simply be a child in a very unusual household. Any regrets? Adrian asked, joining her among the rose bushes. Sarah considered the question. Their life was far from normal, but it was rich with possibility and security she had never dreamed of. Tommy was thriving, she was pursuing her education, and finding fulfillment in work that mattered, and she had found a love she hadn't expected. None, she said, taking Adrian's cool hand in hers. Though I have to admit, when I gave you my coat that night, I never imagined it would lead to all this. The best gifts often come from the simplest acts of kindness, Adrian replied, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss. You saved my life that night, Sarah. I'm just grateful I've been able to return the favor. As the sun set over their extraordinary household, Sarah reflected on how a single moment of compassion had transformed everything. She had thought she was helping a stranger in need, never knowing she was about to change the course of 3 lives forever. Sometimes, she thought, the most important choices were the ones you made without thinking, guided only by the certainty that kindness was always the right choice. In the distance, Tommy's laughter rang out across the garden, bright and carefree. Whatever the future held, whatever choices he would eventually face, for now he was simply a happy child in a place where he was loved and protected. And for Sarah, that was more than enough.